here to talk about our medical innovation system. This is the system that's meant to be designing our new medical technologies for us. Now, I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is that our medical innovation system is broken. But don't worry, because we have good news. And the good news is that we can solve this problem. Now, the reason why I say our medical innovation system is broken is that we run medical innovation and research and development and link it to high prices. So it's quite easy. The solution is to break this link. That's called delinkage. But before I go into that, I want to relate an experience of mine on how I came to realize that our medical innovation system isn't really working for us. Now, in 2001, I was living in Uganda. It was an amazing experience of my life. I traveled around the country. I enjoyed the warm hospitality of the people there. I played football, and I practiced medicine. But that's where things didn't go so well. Because at the time, we were facing some major public health problems that we couldn't solve. HIV/AIDS. It was a big killer in the country, and we couldn't access life-saving drugs because they were just too expensive. Malaria. We were using a drug called chloroquine that wasn't working anymore because of high levels of drug resistance. And sleeping sickness. I can't describe to you how nasty and fatal this disease is. We were using an old drug based on arsenic to treat our patients that killed 5% of people. And that's because we had nothing better available to use. That was a situation that we were in. And when I came back to the United Kingdom, I started to think about all the things I took for granted that patients and people on the other side of the planet could not access. And I came to realize that some of the problems that I saw was due to the failures in our medical innovation system. Innovation. What does it mean? People have used this word throughout the length of this day. Well, I looked it up in a dictionary, because I'm a simple kind of guy. And this is what it says. Something newly introduced. And the key word for me here is introduced. Because if it's not introduced, and if it's not accessible to people, it's not innovation. That's just the definition. Now, based on that, I'll propose a definition for medical innovation. It's a new tool or method that's made accessible and that leads to a public health impact. I'll repeat that. A tool or method that's made accessible and that leads to a public health impact. If there's one thing that you remember from my talk today, it's that, because everything else I'm going to say just follows from this. So, how does our current medical innovation system work? Well, I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you're a company and you produce a drug. Well, what we do, and I mean by we, I mean governments, we award a patent, and through that patent, we grant a monopoly. And it's that monopoly, it's the ability to charge high prices that incentivizes companies or groups to do medical innovation. That's the link. Now, there are two things in this equation. First of all, are we getting what we need? And secondly, I think this is a very, very key point in what I'm talking about. Is there a balance in this equation? Is there a balance in terms of cost? Well, I think the problem that we have now can be broken down into three components and three questions linked to what I've just said. First of all, do we get what we need? Well, I think this is quite a critical question because innovation is meant to serve us. So looking at it from that basis, we ask the question, do we get what we need? And if you look at the answer, you realize it's because of the problem and the way our system is designed. Now, if our system of doing research and development is based on profitability, it means it's not based on public health and public health needs. And I'll give you some examples for this. For instance, why would we develop drugs that effectively are useful for people who are poor? Why would we invent any technology, in fact, for diseases that only affect poor people? A very good example of this is sleeping sickness, which mainly occurs in fact, exclusively occurs in sub-Saharan Africa. Another question, why would you invest in technologies, or cures even, for rare diseases, even if they occur in rich countries? An example of this is motor neurons disease. It's also called Lou Gehrig's disease. We have one treatment available for this disease, and it doesn't even work particularly well. Third question. Why would you actually invest in short, life-saving treatments, for instance, like new antibiotics, when you can actually invest in lifelong treatments for chronic diseases? And finally, and I think this is the worst aspect, why would you actually invest in completely new technologies and new ideas that involves risk, when you can actually just invest in making improvements on current technologies? That's actually called evergreening, and I think it's one of the most pernicious aspects of our medical innovation system. Now, a second question. Can we afford what we get, irrespective of whether we need it or not? I'll give you an example, going back to the story that I mentioned in Uganda, HIV/AIDS. Before 2001, the cost for life-saving treatment of HIV/AIDS was $10,000 US per person per year. Now, who amongst my patients in Uganda could afford that? And the consequences of that was that millions of people across the world did not get access to life-saving treatment and died. That's the consequences of the current system that we have. And things actually changed when low-cost producers came online and reduced the price of these life-saving drugs by an unbelievable 99%. And guess what? We went from managing 100,000 people a year on those life-saving drugs in 2001 to 8 million people today. That's the innovation. That's the change. But I can give you plenty of other examples. Many of you know how expensive cancer drugs are. And actually, a lot of the time, this has got nothing to do with how expensive it is to actually make them. Some of these drugs are very cheap to make. Now, let me go to the third question. Who really pays for research? Well, about 2005, we spent about 160 billion US dollars on medical research. The figure is a lot higher today, it's probably over 200 billion US dollars. But the interesting thing about this period of time is that when we look at the breakdown of who actually paid for research, we find that the public, that's us, Joe Public, the taxpayer, paid for over 40% of costs for research and development. Now think about what I said earlier, the way the system is meant to work. We provide that promise of high prices that's meant to pay for research and development. So this is actually a very costly system. We're paying for research and development, almost half of it, then we pay high prices at the end. So what's the cost of all of this? Well, in 2011, the global spending on just branded drugs alone is $600 billion. That's how much we spent in 2011. That's a lot of money. Now when we look back to see what actually went on research and development, we find that only 16% of that, that's 1 out of every $6 we spent on branded drugs, went back into research and development. So, to summarize it again, this is the situation. We pay a lot at the beginning, almost half. We pay a huge amount at the end, and sometimes we don't even get what we really need. That's the crazy, anti-competitive, public subsidy-dependent system of medical innovation that we have today. That's the problem, because essentially it's based on monopolies. High cost of R&Ds, high prices. And we need to move to something different. We need to move to a needs-driven model that's pro-science, that's based on priorities, and that can allow fair pricing through free market competition. It sounds like a pipe dream, but I think this is possible. And I mentioned the solution right at the beginning of my talk. De-linkage. We need to break that link between research and development and high prices. And we have to do this by finding new ways to invest and fund research and development. That can then allow free market and competitive environment for the production and sales of medical innovation, medical tools. Now, the key question, how can we do this? How can we go from a model that's failing us to a model that can work? Well, I think there are 3 issues that we need to address. First, how do we set priorities? Well, if we don't ask for it, we don't get it. It's quite simple. So I believe that our governments and public health institutions should play a big part in actually setting the priorities. And we should always start with the biggest priorities. Where are the biggest gaps and the needs? And I also believe that we need to ensure that we link priorities with funds, with money. That leads me to the second point, how to pay for R&D. Because I mentioned to you before, we're already spending a huge amount of money on R&D. So by ensuring that we fund priorities, we can ensure we get what we need. And I think that everybody needs to step up on the plate. I think the truth of it is that all governments, society needs to pay for it. And we need to pay according to our means. I think that's fair. And I think another important part is that when we are putting our money on the table, we need to protect our public investments. That means ensuring provisions that allow access and affordability. Now the third issue, how can we ensure that we deliver? Because we can put money on the table, so we can set priorities, but it doesn't necessarily mean we deliver. Well, I think we need to set different models of incentives that we currently have now. We need to get rid of the system of monopolies, because monopolies in general are generally a bad idea. We need to move to different ideas. For instance, one idea that's been suggested by a consumer group, Knowledge Ecology International, is to think about prizes. And I don't mean a gold medal at the end. I mean, if somebody develops a technology that we need, we award them a big payout at the end that rewards them for all the investment they put for research and development and more. Other ideas including finding ways to stimulate early stage research. This can include targeted grants, and it could also include things like milestone prizes. So we award prizes as we go along each step of the research pathway. Another idea that's also been suggested, which I think is very important, is to make sure that we adequately fund and support late-stage research, translational research. This is the kind of research that takes ideas and makes it into a reality. For instance, takes a molecule in the laboratory bench and makes it into a drug at the patient's bedside. Now, it might surprise you to actually hear that some of these ideas actually exist, albeit on a smaller scale. For instance, we have the Prize for Life initiative that actually looks at awarding milestone prizes for Lou Gehrig's disease. We also have product development partnerships, these are private-public partnerships, that work to develop solid tools for priorities that we need. An example of that is the Drugs for Neglected Diseases initiative that actually works to develop cures for diseases that I mentioned before, like sleeping sickness. So to summarize, what we need to do is find new ideas, like prizes and targeted grants. We can even award a patent, but when we do, we need to ensure that the technologies are licensed out and made freely available, and that we can allow a free market system to work to allow fair pricing and competition, which is extremely critical in reducing the price of drugs. Just remember that story I told you at the beginning about HIV and how we change things through low-cost producers. Now, our current system is actually governed by an international trade agreement. I won't go into the details of that, but there are people who actually believe that by strengthening these current rules, we can overcome the gaps of innovation, when they are the actual problem itself. What we need to do is create a new framework, a new way of doing research and development. And I think we need to do this through a form of an international treaty for research and development, and for medical innovation in general. Now, again, it might surprise some of you to know that this has actually been discussed in the World Health Organization. In 2012, a group of experts convened by the World Health Organization actually sat down and made some recommendations, including looking at ways of how we can achieve delinkage. Now, next month, member states of the World Health Organization are going to meet, and they're going to discuss how to take these recommendations forward. These member states, they represent you. And if you care about medical innovation, you should let them know. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about my experience. It's also about my health. And it's about your health. And it's about public health. I think it's time we made our medical innovation system work for us. Thank you.